It should have been a simple test. The wormhole stretched from the moon's orbit to an empty patch of space near Neptune, where a welcome party was already being arranged. It had taken huge effort and resources to reach down into the quantum foam and pluck a wormhole from those depths. But general relativity had predicted their existence. And now here it was. With this technology, humanity could finally achieve the dream of interstellar travel. And so, after the last calibrations and tweaks, the ship and its brave crew entered the wormhole's throat, passing easily through the sphere of the entrance. Onlookers could see the retreating vessel gradually shrinking away as it appeared to move effortlessly to its destination, 412 billion kilometers away. At the other end, the reception party could see the ship approaching, slowly getting larger as the minutes ticked by. The test probe had taken roughly 30 minutes to traverse the distance, and the manned vessel seemed to be on a similar track. But then, there were murmurs of concern as the ship appeared to slow down, then stall. It looked frozen in place. 30 minutes passed, and the ship did not emerge. Days passed, then weeks, then months. With time, sensitive telescopes at either end were able to determine that the ship was still in motion, but almost imperceptibly slowly. Debates raged about what to do. Send a rescue party? Turn off the wormhole generator? Every option seemed to end in tragedy, with the fragile balance of exotic forces maintaining the stability of the wormhole thrown into disequilibrium, tearing the ship and its crew to pieces. The only safe option was to wait, and so they waited. 500 years passed before what was left of the ship finally emerged from the open end of the wormhole. It was still intact but barely functioning, a broken husk after years of exposure to the harsh conditions within. The crew was long dead, their remains still strapped into the command chairs. Finally, the wormhole was shut down. Clearly, they had miscalculated. The predictions of general relativity were evidently not enough. Humanity looked out at the distant stars and never felt more alone. Wormholes are complicated. They appear in the equations of general relativity, and the idea of them is almost as old as the theory itself. But unfortunately for those test pilots heading to Neptune, relativity is just a machine that tells us how gravity works in various scenarios, regardless of whether or not the universe actually allows those scenarios. And so what would it take to build a wormhole? Which mechanisms allow for wormholes, and which forbid them? And would they transport us to the destinations of our dreams across the stars, or to an early death? Critics called it confusing, dense, and absurd. But to Edgar Allan Poe, it was his greatest work yet. It was 1848, just 1 year before his mysterious death. Having struggled as a professional writer throughout much of his life, his recent success from The Raven had been a welcome financial reprieve, which he took advantage of to compose what he viewed as his masterpiece. Its title was Eureka. The text is expansive, and today little attention is paid to it, especially compared to his much more famous poems. But some statements in its tangled mass still stand out as oddly prescient. For about 2/3 of the way through the text, in the middle of a section where Poe discusses the expanses of interstellar space, he declares almost out of nowhere that space and duration are one. Working nearly a century later, Albert Einstein had no idea that in some sense he was recapitulating the thoughts of a long-dead New England poet, but that is exactly what he ended up doing. It was 1905, a year which would become known as Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, a year of miracles. In that single year, Einstein published 5 papers, each one with huge implications for our reality. And one of those papers, perhaps his most consequential, concerned the relationship between movement and energy. It's in this paper that Einstein formulated his special theory of relativity, which showed that the measurements of length and time were relative to the observer. But Einstein's former teacher, Hermann Minkowski, thought that he hadn't gone far enough. And so, shortly after, Minkowski offered an intuitive geometric formulation of Einstein's work, presenting the universe as a 4-dimensional object. Unlike Poe's ideas, however, this new spacetime did not mean that space and time were identical. Instead, they were different facets of a single unified entity. But Einstein would learn from his teacher once more, and quickly adopted this new idea, using it to make one more gigantic leap in human imagination. Since the beginning, history of the universe has had one simple aim: to tell the story of our universe, whilst also celebrating the geniuses who uncovered our world's secrets, but also the organizations where these revelations occurred, like experiments at CERN or science at NASA, without which we would know so much less about the cosmos. That's our passion project. But what would your passion project be? Whether you want to create documentaries, a podcast, a company that sells services, or a brand that sells products, Squarespace can help. Squarespace is super simple to use and easily allows you to build a totally unique online presence for your project and members. Only content in particular is easy to create on Squarespace. Whether that be videos, blogs, online courses, or memberships, you simply upload your content and choose whether it's a one-time fee or a subscription model. You can also fundraise using built-in donation tools, giving you another way to get ambitious projects off the ground. The website design tools, templates, and styling options are also great features, helping you to quickly realize a visually stunning hub for your project, whatever it is. So head to squarespace.com/historyoftheuniverse to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code historyoftheuniverse, and start your passion project today. In 1915, Einstein unleashed into the unsuspecting world a general theory of relativity. In the language of general relativity, space-time isn't static. It responds to the presence of matter and energy. The unified fabric of space-time bends and warps due to matter's influence. And in return, that bending of space-time influences the motion of matter. Indeed, years later, famed physicist John Wheeler would sum it all up with the simple phrase, "Matter tells space how to curve, and space tells matter how to move." Though there was some progress soon after Einstein developed relativity, Carl Schwarzschild found a solution involving the simplest arrangement of matter possible while serving in the trenches of World War I. In this case, Schwarzschild took the machine of relativity and input, something resembling the solar system. Out popped a description of the strength of gravity surrounding the sun. While the solution was intended to mimic the solar system, it contained something else, the possibility of a singularity. The idea that if the ball of matter were to be squeezed below a certain limit, then it would just keep collapsing. And most scoffed at the idea. Indeed, Einstein himself rejected it. In a 1939 paper, he argued that no object could ever shrink to the degree that gravity would win out over all the other forces. But J. Robert Oppenheimer disagreed. Just a few months after Einstein's publication, Oppenheimer was working with his student Hartland Snyder. Once you folded in the rest of our knowledge of physics, they found that there was really nothing to stop the infinite gravitational collapse of a massive enough star. However, the same day that the duo published their paper, Germany invaded Poland. Their work would be forgotten for decades. As Oppenheimer worked away in service of the United States government, behind the Iron Curtain, Soviet astronomer Igor Novikov saw something else produced by the equations. The black hole had a twin. Imagine if we took a video of you tossing a ball up in the air and catching it. Both the forward and backward playthrough would look identical, just a ball going up and down. The mathematics of relativity are similar. In 1964, Novikov realized that the equations of black holes could be run in reverse. Instead of trapping particles forever, they could eject particles forever. Instead of a black hole, it could be a white hole. Rosen had already spent a few months at Princeton before he finally built up the courage to meet with the legendary physicist. When he did, timidly knocking on the genius's door, Einstein was engaged in a deep conversation with another collaborator. As Rosen himself related years later, I told him about my work on the solutions of the equations of his unified field theories, and he seemed interested and asked many questions. Rosen found that if you followed this path, you would end up back in the universe, but not where you started. The path would form a bridge between two different regions of the universe. Wheeler had had an appetite for probing questions since his youth. His mother recounted that one day when he was 4 years old and splashing around in a bathtub, he went suddenly still, looked up at her and asked, "What happens when you get to the end of things?" And indeed, he never let go of that childhood curiosity and some childhood mannerisms, including a particular joy in racing down flights of stairs as quickly as he could. And it was this boundless energy that allowed him to investigate questions that nobody else dared to explore. Wheeler realized they might provide a mechanism for interstellar travel. Wheeler found that this destructive process happens faster than the speed of light. Nothing, not even light, can travel through the throat of a wormhole and safely emerge from the other end before the tunnel destroys itself. Sometimes a writer or director comes along who wants to hew a little closer to our modern understanding of how the universe works. And one example of this is the film Interstellar, directed by Christopher Nolan. So Thorne and his collaborators came up with a way to stabilize them. The idea was never intended as a serious venture into theoretical physics. Indeed, his 1988 paper on the subject was subtitled, "A Tool for Teaching General Relativity." Thorne found one simple trick of the universe that could solve both problems within the equations of general relativity. The machine of relativity would tell him what exotic matter was needed to keep wormholes stable, but Thorne worked the equations in reverse. He started with a specific structure in space-time, the wormhole bridge between two regions of the universe, and asked the equations what configuration of matter and energy is required to make that tunnel stable.